I moved to Trout Lake in 1991 because I got a job with a farm there, which was producing organic medicinal herbs. And as it happens, my one of my immediate neighbors when I moved in was pretty involved with Friends of the White Salmon, and so um, just through social stuff and meeting people, I joined the organization, and that was pretty quick after I got there. Whereas living was not far from the river, there was a ledge over there that you could get down. People try to use it now for hiking input, but the owners don't really like that. So, but there's a nice ledge where you can actually get down to the river, sit by it. Uh, it's a pretty amazing place up there, especially in white salmon. Back then, it was very little development, and uh, you could just imagine that you were just sitting there next to this thing that had been there for a very long time, right? So that's how I got started. Friends of White Salmon was formed in 1976, which was, quite a few years before I came. The Klickitat Public Utility District had applied to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to build a series of 7 dams on the river, starting at BZ Corner or above BZ Corner and going. They weren't applying to flood the Trout Lake Valley, but they were going both sides of the valley, below and above. But 7 dams, 7 miles of generation pipe, or 7 generation stations, 7 miles of tubing, and it would have just been enormously destructive to the river. And people up and down the valley in Trout Lake and in white salmon and Houston and BZ formed the Friends of White Salmon to fight that application at FERC, which is the federal agency. And it went on a long time. It was lawyers and testimony for years, and they had to fly back to DC, and it was a serious application on this part of the public of the POD, and they prevailed. The FERC turned down the application, which, in light of what happened later, is a very fortunate thing because it kept the river free up above BC. Yeah, and then we moved on from that to the removal of conduit. We've always been a small local organization, and most of our time we've had really limited capacity. There's been 1 or 2 people who've just put in enormous amounts of time, and the people who would participate somewhat. But so we got involved in the removal of conduit, and then we got involved in after the white salmon segment was designated wild at sea. We're involved in the creation of the management plan for that, and then getting the upper part of the river designated wildlife scenic. It's all on public lands, but it still makes a difference that it's designated. So everything on the forest, from the forest boundary, the white salmon and Cascade Creek are now wildlife scenic, which is wonderful. And then one of the things that we spent 7 years on was a land use proposal in Houston, BZ to rezone pretty much everything along the river into 2-acre zoning, which would have opened up for residential development. And that was a long fight. It was also in courts and lawyers and stuff. And we're very happy now that we didn't win. We won at the first court level at Superior Court, and then the county went to the state appeals court. And then just before the appeals court was going to issue the decision, the county withdrew their proposal. So there was never a legal decision that was a precedent or anything like that, but we did cause them to withdraw. And now, after all that's happened, there's 180 acres or so of that land going to be rezoned that is now in the process of being given to the Forest Service, sold to the Forest Service, and it's right on the white salmon. It's right above the takeout, and it's a beautiful parcel, and it's old trees, and it's just gorgeous, and it would have been all developed for housing. So that was something that we feel pretty good about. There were other parcels involved in that too, but that was the main one. And then all along, we've been involved in actions against logging, commercial, industrial logging on the white salmon, stuff that would affect the water quality and the shorelines and so on, and residential development. And we participated in a lot of land use actions. And then long time we've been fighting to protect western gray squirrel, which is this little teeny, well, it's a big squirrel. It can crack a walnut with its jaw. It's a pretty big squirrel. But they're pretty reclusive, and they're now endangered in the state of Washington. And there are 1,100 of them, something statewide, and more than half of those are supposed to be here, but they're really in peril. And we've been working on that for years. And then the last thing that we really was a sustained effort was something called the Lower White Salmon Coalition. Because once Pacific Corps removed the dam, they owned 550 acres of land that had been purchased 100 years ago or more when the dam was being built by Pacific Corps for various uses related to the dam. So the question is, what was going to happen to that land? And some of it had the cabins in Northwestern Lake on them. And those folks they thought they had an agreement to purchase the land under their cabins. But it never was actually, it wasn't a very clear agreement. So those of us who are interested in conservation of the lake bed parcels and the river, and a bunch of groups came together, including the cabin owners, to try to work with Pacific Corps about the future of that land. And we wrote a nice plan, which I think really influenced the Pacific Corps' decision to finally decide to sell that land, which they have done. And it will all go into Yakima Nation hands. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. So there are two segments, and the one from the dam to the mouth of the river, the Yakima had an agreement with Pacific Corps before the license was really relinquished to potentially purchase that. And then in the kind of coming through the Friends of the Lower White Salmon Coalition process, the Conservation Fund stepped in to be a bridge funder, and we tried actually pretty hard to see if we could find Underwood Conservation District, state parks, Forest Service, any conservation owner for that land. But there were a lot of barriers to people wanting to do that. And so Conservation Fund, they were part of the coalition from the beginning, and they stepped forward and they have purchased the land from Pacific Corps, and their intention is to sell it to the Yakima. So that will be all about 500 acres. Pacific Corps sold, there was a 50-acre parcel in there that they just, nobody knew that they could subdivide it. It turned out there was this old legal thing, and they sliced this parcel off. It's a beautiful wooded, it was gorgeous, and it should never have been sold, but it was sliced off and sold for 5-acre development, I think. But the rest of it now will all be in Yakima Nation hands. And if you happen to have a chance to go there to the park with somebody from the tribe, and you're lucky, you'll get to hear people point out where their grandparents' houses were, so there's a long connection there. There are still family members around who had allotments. Because my understanding is that the Yakima have family allotments. You get to fish here and you get to fish there. It's fairly well organized kind of system, and there are people whose relatively new recent ancestors, grandparents, great grandparents, had those allotments. So we'll see what's going to happen next. Yeah, I live here now, right? I mean, it's part of my home, and it just does its thing. I mean, I'm not much into like beauty. You could find beauty anywhere, right? I've lived in downtown District of Columbia, DuPont Circle, and you could find stuff to get up in the morning and go, oh, look at that. But this river is still reasonably unspoiled. And I've seen a lot of rivers and things that algae everywhere or bad water quality, heat, contamination, that kind of stuff. So the fact that this river is still kind of doing its thing, I love that about it. It just it's it's a reminder for me of what nature does, what natural systems do, if we just leave them alone to do their thing, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not a kayaker. I'm not a whitewater recreation person. I've been on a kayak twice in my life on flat water, right? I don't fish, right? So none of those kinds of recreational uses are part of my experience of the river at all, which is fine. I understand why people do those things. There really is a special air down there. If you're on the river, you're getting all sorts of, I don't know what it is, oxygen or something, and it's amazing and it's great. And when I've been on raft trips, I love that. But that whole history it's a clash of cultures. It's like settlers came here with a mindset of ownership and of uses of land and this relationship to the land, which is frankly so screwed up. I mean, it's like when you think about the fact that the settlers brought this system that draws straight lines on the land, boxes, squares, sections, ranges, townships, and the whole thing is all split up into squares. No relationship to the natural features of the land. Those square split rivers, they go around. I mean, this is nuts. But that's what people came with. And that idea of exploitation, like somehow I get to take what I want here and I get to try to dominate it. I get to tell it what to do, the trees where to grow and the rivers where they should be and stuff. And in Klickitat County, that wasn't all that long ago. I'm from the East Coast, and my family came to Connecticut in 1632. By the time I was born, the native culture that had been there was pretty well gone. It wasn't entirely gone. People knew some of the words, and it's funny, it wasn't entirely gone. But here, it's within living memory. Not living memory, but it's that arrival of that very just unhelpful viewpoint is pretty recent. So that's what I think people need to think about. I mean, there were permanent settlements in Houston of Yakima, some bands and tribes, and there's a Yakima band out near Rock Creek that refused to go to the reservation, and they are really on land where they have been for millennia. And it's still a problem because that land where they've been for a long time, people didn't think it was worth anything. But all of a sudden, it's like somebody can build a vacation home, or we can do this, or we can do solar, all that stuff. So there's still that clash of culture out there. And so that's, people need to just think about those really very, very different cultural ideas of how we relate to the place that we live and how we live with the place that we live. So that's what I want people to think about. I mean, the dam was a big mistake. The whole idea that rivers are just for transport. I mean, I'm sure the native cultures, obviously, they had some river transportation, but if there was wood in the river and there were beavers in the river, they didn't tear all that stuff out so they could float a boat down it, you know? So this idea that we all have that rivers have to be clean and empty so that we can move things up and down them, it's just, we really seem unable to even imagine. And I didn't know this when I got here. This is all stuff that I have learned by talking to people. I really remember going out to Trout Lake Creek with a couple of fish biologists who I know, and they were helping me see how different that would have looked before the settler ethos got here. And they were just like, look, what you're seeing here is nothing at all like what you would have seen. Trout Lake was one big beaver dam, basically, apparently. Just beavers everywhere, wetlands everywhere, and the streams and everything, wood in them, and you can't go backwards. You cannot return. There are too many people, and a lot of damage has been done. And that's not, I don't in any way think that we can go back to some earlier way of life, but I think that we can change the way we think about our relationship to the natural world and to the land. And that's what I want people to think about, because it's close enough here that you can really get a sense of what it would have looked like and how people would have related to it. Yeah. Well, it restored itself. I mean, down, above and below the dam, the lake and everything. It was really fast. Everybody was going, oh, we didn't expect this, but it's powerful. Nature has a lot of power. You see the same thing with the fires, right? I mean, fires run through, and you see things just, it's slower because trees take a long time to grow. But the natural system perseveres, right? And that's what's happened on the river. Lots of things. I mean, it's had help. Pacific Ore planted a lot of stuff along the lake beds and so on. And there's been a lot of weed pulling and so on and so forth. What but I don't think it's affected much above the dam. I mean, I don't think the dam removal changed much of what the river does above. But humans are changing it. Now, the changes since the dam came out, and more and more houses, more and more shorelines destruction, and that's just ongoing. Trout Lake has been a bad place for the river for a long time. So there, you're not seeing much additional damage because most of the damage was already done up in Trout Lake. But along from BZ down, more houses, more roads, more tree cutting, more this, more that. And that's too bad. Well, now that's the $64 million question nobody knows. There were Pacific Core funded research before the dam came out. People did a lot of research, and they had a really good picture of what it looked like before the dam came out. And they had plans. The Yakima, the USGS, people who run that kind of research, had really good plans for research after the dam came out, but there was no funding for them. And so there's a minimal amount of monitoring. WDFW does some monitoring, juvenile monitoring, I think it is, on the lower 2 miles of the river where there's a lot of spawning. And they come out, I think, for coho. They're not getting all the species. It's only one season. But they are doing some monitoring. They've been doing that pretty consistently. The Yakima had a rotary trap for a while that was catching outgoing juveniles that was above the lower 2 miles, but they ran out of funding to do that. And Trout Unlimited is doing some red monitoring and that is coho and steelhead. And they start in October, November, and finish up in maybe maize, and so they're going out looking for reds where the fish lay their eggs, right? And um, weather permitting, it's all volunteers. They their numbers are being recorded by WDFW because the protocols they're using were established by WDFW. So it's actual science. It's not anecdotal. They have a protocol, how often they go, what they do, how they do it, what they write down. So that information is good, but it's limited by when they can get into the river, if the weather's bad, if they have enough volunteers to go out as often as they should. But that's been ongoing for 3 or 4 years now, so that's good. It's on the trims of Buck Creek, and Spring Creek, and another creek up there. They have not been able to get into rattlesnake because you have to have willing landowners to do that kind of stuff. Nobody in rattlesnake's been willing to let them in. Rattlesnake are where the steelhead are supposed to be. So we really don't know much, and it drives me crazy. We have thought so hard and so often about what to do about this. And the thing is that there's no public money. That's everybody thinks, oh, you just go apply to NOAA, or you just go apply to no. That money is not available for a whole lot of complicated reasons. The federal money that comes through the state salmon recovery funding board, the surf board we call it, that money is also not available for a lot of very complicated political reasons. And the other thing is that what people want to fund is things like taking out a culvert, removing fish barriers. Nobody wants to fund monitoring, which is tedious, and you have to do it 3 times a week. And it's labor intensive, and it's really, really, no matter what wildlife species you're dealing with or whatever you're dealing with, it is really hard to find money to monitor things. People want to spend money on equipment; they don't want to spend money on people. But it's a shame because there's no pit tagging going on the river. There are fish coming into the river from other places. The fish kind of cruise in and rest up and hang out for a little while and go on or whatever. Some of them are going to be pit tagged. We don't have a single pit tag reader, not a single one, anywhere in the white salmon. It's really a disgrace. And it's going to have to be funded privately. And I have my latest idea about this, which I'm now trying to work on. I have some thoughts about some nonprofits that I might reach out to for some help, but it's expensive. We're talking about like a couple of $1 million to fund 5 years worth of research of monitoring. And some of the things that you might want to do, like what do they call it? The ENR, whatever it is, that stuff where you get the DNA out of the river, you get the water, and you look for the DNA that's in it. There's some interesting work that could be done there that's actual research. It would further your knowledge of fish genetics and that kind of stuff. And that's really important. But a lot of what needs to be done is just monitoring. We just cannot find money. It really is a disgrace. Up on Elwha, they took that dam out after Condit, and it's all on federal land, and there was money just pouring in there to do research after. But this is just different. And we are one of maybe 4 or 6 watersheds in the state that have anadromous fish that have not had hatchery fish introduced. It's rare what's the condition of this river. Almost everywhere there hatchery fish been introduced, not here. And we need to know, what are the fish doing? Who's coming to live here? Who's laying their eggs? Who's coming back? Who likes it? Who doesn't? How far do they go? It would tell us so much, but we just can't find the funding to do it. It's so frustrating. Well, the biggest opportunity is to try to keep it wild. That's what needs to happen. And that's a huge opportunity because it isn't already gone. The threats are climate change would be right at the top of my list. In the years I've been here, those glaciers up on that mountain are just disappearing. The white salmon depends on being cold. It needs to be cold. That's the reason the whitewater folks love it. It runs all summer. It's cold. Most rivers dry up in the summer. They go way down or whatever. This one is because of the glacial flow. The recharge of BZ, those giant springs that come in there, And climate change is really going to wreck that. I mean, the water quality this year is so much. It's just been so scary. So that is like the number one thing in my mind is uh, climate change, the effect on the glaciers and the effect on the river. Uh, it'll change the patterns. Of course, what you'll get is really higher flows, get a lot of rain, not much snow. There are people really eloquent about what it's actually going to do to the river, but overall, it's a huge threat. And parcel fragmentation and development, residential development, land use patterns, also number 2 on my list. Industrial logging, number 3 on my list, because there's a lot of it going on. After SDS sold, and a lot of land went into Green Diamond and the conservation funds company, Lupin Forest. They all spent giant amounts of money to buy that land. We don't know how much they spent because nobody's saying. But they spent giant amounts of money, and they have investors, and they have to pay them back out. So the logging is it's so fast. And SDS had this average age of 75 years on their trees, which is old. The average age in the state of Washington for industrial timber is like 30 years. And those 75-year-olds, and that's their average age. So there was a bunch older and younger. That stuff is being just cut like crazy. That's carbon release. It's water quality, runoff getting into the water. It's all kinds of things. That's just pretty serious for the watershed. So lots of challenges. Well, I mean, the climate change thing affects everything. Uh, the 2 things that I've personally spent the most time on the last few years is western gray squirrel, who are so interesting because they're just they eat mostly on the forest floor and they move seeds around and they're really part of the whole system. And their habitat's just being destroyed. And it's one of those things. It's like they're not glamorous, right? But they're important. And just sort of slowly watching stuff being destroyed for them. We actually just this year have found western gray squirrel in a place where all the western gray squirrel experts said, no, they wouldn't live there because it's going to be cut. It's state land that's going to be harvested, and it's 100-plus-year-old trees. And everybody's going, no, we don't need to look for gray squirrel. They're not there. But they are there. We have videos. And so they just try to survive. They're a lesson in a species that's just doing whatever it can to survive. And that's very cool to watch them do that. They may fail, but at least they're giving it their all, right? The thing is the whole cougar and bear thing in this county. I've spent a lot of time on. You probably know we have a sheriff here who has a posse, and he thinks that part of his posse's job is to take their dogs and go hunt cougar. And dog hunting was outlawed by referendum here in the 1970s, using dogs to hunt cougars and bears and stuff. It was overwhelmingly voted out by a state referendum. But our sheriff thinks that he has a bunch of friends, I think, who like to hunt with dogs. And so they define everything as a public safety issue. So somebody's out hunting in the woods and they see a cougar, they call the sheriff. The sheriff goes out with his dogs and tracks down the cougar. Or somebody has a domestic animal that's killed and they go hunt down the closest cougar. I mean, it's crazy because you have no idea whether you're actually tracking and killing the animal that was there. I mean, they're not like many cougars per square mile, but the females and the juveniles have territories inside the bigger male territories. So in any given area, you could have several cougars. And we're seeing a lot of juvenile cougars here whose mothers are killed, and they don't know how to hunt. It takes them more than a year to learn how to hunt properly, and if their mother's killed, and then they get into people's chickens. I mean, it's so sad. There was a case of rattlesnake last year sometime where 3 kittens were in somebody's uh, chicken yard, and their mother was nowhere. So those were picked up, and now they're in the zoo. So right, there's a lot of that. So that is something that's me personally. Friends of the White Salmon is not particularly involved in that because we just don't have the capacity. But it's very important to me, that whole story, because it's like the inability to appreciate what role these large predators, cougars and bears and stuff, they're important. And they control disease in deer because they pick off the ones that are sick. There's the whole experience in Yellowstone where they got uh, the uh, mountain lions and stuff back up, and all of a sudden the vegetation is doing better because they're keeping the ungulate populations under control. So there's less grazing. So the water is doing better because the ungulates are not grazing. And besides that, you know, to me, all these critters out there, they have lives, they have character, and I just can't get that you just want to go out, shoot them right, and left, and eliminate them all, get rid of them. I can't relate to that at all. I mean, I don't want to meet one. I know people who think it's the greatest thing in the world to go out in the woods and see a cougar. Oh, it's oh boy, that's so much fun. Well, that's not me, right? But uh, I have domestic animals. I have chickens and I have donkeys, and I can see perfectly clearly that each one of those critters has a personality, and they have relationships, and they have. When you go out and you kill things indiscriminately, you wouldn't put up with people walking up and down the street here killing people. So why would you put up with people walking around in the woods killing everything? I cannot wrap my wrath in it. That's what's on my mind. But there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, there's beavers. Beavers are another whole thing. Beavers are great. And there's a move to restore them. And that's really cool. And there's, I don't know, so much going on. Yeah. I hope that they will experience a river that has been blessed to be itself, and that they will, like if it wants to flood, wants to move, it wants to whatever it wants to do, that people will have learned to stay away far enough so that it can do its thing without taking their houses away, right? I mean, river's alive, right? And you hear a lot about, no water, no life. There are all these slogans. Water is life. And you're always slogans. The thing is, it's real. It's a very complicated system. And the stuff that lives on the edges of rivers, not just in the water, but in the banks, and what they call the hyporeic functions, where the bacteria and all these different organisms are cleaning the water and talking to each other and feeding this, and this is feeding this, which is feeding that, which is feeding that, which is feeding the plants that drop the stuff in the river that the fish eat. It's just this enormously complicated, beautiful system. And I hope that people understand that and get to just that it's still working for them. Yeah. Yeah. There's more to know about the white salmon than anybody can take in. Just they should look at it with a feeling of gratitude and awe.